We are now going to begin session 3, our session with Indiaspora. This one is called The Future of U.S. Silicon Valley Ties, and it's going to be led by the head of Indiaspora, Sumir Rajaswamy. And we are very, very grateful to our friends at Indiaspora for partnering us. Please welcome Sumir Rajaswamy.
Great. Well, I got to get a mic here. We got 3 great panelists, but is this on? Yes. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Again, just a quick intro on Indiaspora, and then we'll get the panelists. We're honored to partner with Asia Society. Indiaspora is a network of global diaspora leaders who want to be a force for good. And what that means is focusing on philanthropy, focusing on entrepreneurship, and focusing on connecting the global diaspora of Indians, which is about 32 million. But we also do a lot of work with U.S. India relations, and so we'll get into a lot of that as we go along. I have 3 eminent panelists. One of them was a moderator the previous time. So please welcome Priya Rajan with Silicon Valley Bank, SVB. And then we have Jishnu Bhattacharjee with Nexus, one of Naren Gupta's partners, and we'll get some light into that. And then last but not least, Sumir Chadha with WestBridge. Come on up, Sumir. I don't know why Sumir is getting away from me. He's I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
We'll have some trying fun. To get away from me.
Anyway, great to have all of you here. I mean, 3 eminent people to discuss we're going to focus in on the U.S. India corridor and what's happening in India a little bit. The previous session did a lot more on India. We're going to talk more about the corridor, more about the ecosystem that is developed in the U.S. And a preamble to that is last night we had a meeting of India CEOs or Indian CEOs who had moved to Silicon Valley. And we had over 100 of them who have moved in the past 3 to 5 years. Huge group of people, so we'll talk about that as well. But first I want to start with remembering Naren Gupta. So maybe we'll take a minute each. Jishnu being the closest to Naren and his partner at Nexus for a decade.
14 years.
14 years. Let's just go around and reflect for a minute on what Naren meant to you, your firm, what inspires you today about Naren. Jishnu?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Sumir. And first of all, thank you, Asia Society and Indiaspora for putting together this wonderful session. And talking about Naren, of course, previous speakers have shed light on his life, like the way, Vinita, Naren's wife, puts it. And we all have seen in action in Nexus Venture Partners that Naren worked hard, enjoyed hard. And that was true till 2 hours before he passed away. So it's a lot to celebrate what he has achieved all through his life. For me, it's very personal. I have known him for last 14 years. I have shared the office with him on a daily basis. In Nexus Venture Partners, the firm which he co-founded in 2006, with the sole intention of tying the bridge between the nexus between US and India. And that was the inspiration. And what Naren stand for all his life was entrepreneurship, and he felt there cannot be anything better to tie the 2 grassroots level economies where people do things, they don't follow just what is being told them, asked them to do. That entrepreneurship is the right connective tissue. So that was the inspiration with which, in fact, the Nexus started, and we are fortunate to be where we are today, and we have a legacy to carry forward.
Sumir?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to first also thank the Asia Society and thank Indiaspora for a wonderful event. And I'd like to echo some of Jishnu's comments on Naren. Naren was just a very gentle soul, a very kind man, a good man, and amazing achievements in the U.S. India corridor. Really one of the pioneers who built an amazing firm like Nexus. And it was really a pleasure and an honor to partner with him on many companies and I had the pleasure of seeing Naren 4 or 5 days before, unfortunately passed. He was at a small office opening party we had in our San Mateo office, and it was great catching up with Naren, and as usual, he's always so energetic, and I'm really glad that we're doing this lecture series in his honor. It's a real pleasure. Thank you, Amar.
Priya?
Thank you, Amar. I think, as Jishnu said, Nexus is one of the OG in the cross-border investment ecosystems. That's kind of squarely fits with what we do at SVB. With that said, specifically about Naren, I think everybody has talked about it. Just to double-click on all things, my last engagement with him was, this shows how generous he is. He spent almost it's supposed to be an hour commitment. He spent more than 2.5 hours with us at our Sandal office at SVB with 10 student founders that came from India for a delegation. Nothing. There's nothing out of it. There's no investment opportunity. And the time that he spent, I think the founders still speak about it till today. I mean, that shows the caring and the time and why he wants India to be successful. And that continues, right, till today. So, yeah.
Thank you. Just want to echo that. I've known Naren for a long time as well, being a leader in the community. Naren was. And when we first started Indiaspora, I went to him and he signed up on the spot. That's it. It wasn't at the highest level. It wasn't like I was just going to he jumped in, right? And a person is known, I guess, more when he's no more. Indiaspora had a memorial for him, virtual one, and hundreds of people came on to the Zoom event. And so many people had so much good to say about him. That's what is indicative of what someone leaves behind. And I'm glad that Asia Society really decided to do this legacy event. So, Margaret, thank you so much for continuing his legacy and keeping it alive. So getting into what we're going to talk about today is U.S. India, and I want to take it in 3 steps. So first, wanted Jishnu to talk about how this corridor got started. Then I want to get to Priya a little bit initially to talk about the ecosystem that's been built here. Mm-hmm. And third, Sumir, to talk about what is going on in India and how all this, flows through, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe Jishnu, you can start with what is this corridor about? Give some statistics. Last night we had 100 CEOs from India. They're all moving, and the previous panel mentioned a lot of them are reincorporating in Delaware. They're doing things. They're moving here. So just give us context into the corridor, what happens in that aspect. Yeah.
Thanks, Amar. So let me take you back 15 years, 2006, 2007. So what was the state of the union at the time in India, if you look at? India has always been a software hub. I would say 80s, 90s, early 2000s, we have seen software, but that software was IT services. So it was the software that needs to be built, and there were developers in India always. There were great stalwarts who could deliver that as services. So that's how India's software journey started. The inspiration with which Nexus started was that actually there are multiple signs which was there at the time. So one is, of course, the developer base. The second is lot of companies out of US have set up their R&D shops in India. These US companies are, I'm talking about Googles and Microsofts of the world, who had set up R&D for software products. So we had an inspiration that if it is catalyzed right, and if we can bring in expertise from the Valley and have the right team assembled on the ground in India, together we can catalyze software product building out of India and build globally leading software companies, whether it is building products or SaaS, out of India, like the way Israel has done. 9 million people country, 100 plus companies out of Israel trading in NASDAQ today. So I think with that inspiration, so that was one core part of our thesis. And the other part was also that in India, within India, and it's important even though we are talking about cross-border, within India, the digitization wave of the country was just starting. So we saw that what happened in China actually is possible in India over the next 2 decades. And inspiration really was India can be the hybrid of Israel and China. Big domestic opportunity for digitization and big opportunity to build companies, global leaders, using cross-border and selling in India and selling in US and using the power of US to help both the countries on either side. So now with that, I mean it's amazing. Now if the whole thing, now you fast forward. So at that time, hardly there was anything. To give you some statistics, there was no SaaS company, only IT services. And if you look at Digital India, as it is known as today, at that time, hardly the e-commerce sector might be some total amount of annual transactions was probably few hundred millions. Now let's fast forward and let's talk about 2021, circa 2021, where from nowhere, about in total 100 plus unicorns got minted. Maybe around 20 in software SaaS, which was from nowhere, the rest for Digital India. The market cap for this corridor itself, if you just look at the SaaS companies which have been built out of India, is about somewhere between 50 billion to 100 billion. There has been two very remarkable IPOs which has already happened. One in 2020, PubMatic, and the other one in 2021, Freshworks. This corridor market cap is projected to grow to 750 billion to 1 trillion over the next decade. So it's just unimaginable. And when we say that, that is the vehicle through which, India is the amount of jobs that are getting created, the amount of sophistication that's out there. Previous panel talked about unified payment interface. This level of innovation is unheard of. We are, for decades we are seeing technology in U.S. It still pains me when, my bank often almost would like to take money from me for transferring from bank A to bank B in U.S. These things should not be there, and that's what India is teaching the world. So there are a lot of things that is coming out, which will be you probably you're sensing the passion in me here, but it's amazing. It's amazing what's possible, and we look forward to discussing more.
Priya, before I get into this, all of us have been to India many, many times, right? And I used to host the NASSCOM Product Conclave in Bangalore, starting 2010. There were 200 people. This last time, there were 2,500 entrepreneurs. So we've all seen the ecosystem. And Priya, we used to go from here to help them, right?
Exactly.
But now they're coming here. So tell us about the ecosystem development that's happening here.
Yeah, and just a quick background, I oversee the India and Middle East North Africa market for the bank. So I get this unique opportunity. So we're sector agnostic, stage agnostic. So we work with companies that could just be incorporating through a Y Combinator or accelerator up until Decacorn in India. So we work with kind of that broad spectrum. So we get to see the challenges and opportunities that comes along the way. I think it's evolved significantly. I think Jishnu highlighted a lot, MR. So I wrote down a few things. So interestingly, a report. We're about to issue a report, as I mentioned to you, Amar, and you all have been a part of it. It's going to come out because why India, why now? And we talked a bit about it in the last panel. Let's talk about just the data, right? I'm an accountant by background, so just coming back to the roots of data, 100 unicorns that just hit last month. And that's not something to sneeze about, right? And then we're talking about the first Indian kind of SaaS Freshworks that went kind of IPO. That was obviously, as Jishnu highlighted. And we have plenty in the works. Just if the macro environment might not allow them to go this year, but it's in the works. So those are the two that says we're arrived. That kind of sets the tone and the confidence for the folks to do more. The unicorns and the soonicorns to now kind of, okay, I could be an NYSE or I could be a NASDAQ kind of, or maybe now with the India offering to list locally that you don't have to be profitable. That changes the game to do more things within India. Maybe Sumir would highlight that. That's one. And then we're talking about investments into India. About $36 billion was venture capital raised in India in just last year alone. Just that number is like 4x, 3.5x more than what was before. That's incredible. That shows the increasing interest of global investors. And now, Sumir was just talking about it. New players are going in, or players who kind of took a step back are now going in at a mass scale. PE, there's like a merger of kind of VC and PE ecosystem that we're seeing. Inside, Tiger, pick the folks that are here that are very US-centric, no presence in India, now actively looking into India market, and actually now traveling to India to maybe put a shop there over time. And then that's not just at the top level, but going down, Y Combinator. So if you guys are tracking, Y Combinator is one of the top tier accelerators. And if you see the batch size and how much of India represents, more than 50% is global. Out of that, more than 50% of the global is India. So pretty much we're dominating kind of both the India ecosystem from India, but also from here, MR. And then I think we feel the trend is we're just starting, right? The maturity, investor maturity has happened, founder maturity has happened, the community is coming together at the scale that it has never come before. And again, not to reiterating that how Thai is doing and Asia Society and Indiaspora is doing, and yesterday SaaS Boomi, and that was just an awe moment. And I think just like how Jishnu was like passionate, when I moderated the panel, I was like choking up when I was talking about, Girish and his wife being on the stage on NASDAQ in their, silk sari, pressing that knot. That's a moment, that's a proud moment for us, and we need more of those. So
great. And Sumir, you I think next to Naren are the godfather of the Indian industry, if you will. He doesn't look like that.
I promise I'm not that sinister, man. No.
So tell us what is going on in tell us a little bit about WestBridge's investments in India and what's going on now.
Yeah, certainly, MR. And I think just building on Jishnu and Priya's excellent points, we're huge believers in the corridor, particularly in enterprise tech is really where India has incredible strength. And what I would say at a high level, MR, is I think we believe what China did to manufacturing in the 80s, India is going to do to software in this decade. Mm-hmm. And it's for a bunch of reasons that Jishnu and Priya mentioned far more eloquently than I can, but I'll add two more reasons. One is the stunning rise of the Indian-American executive in tech, which we all know about. I mean, I'm shocked. CEO of little companies like Microsoft, IBM, Adobe, And then the irony, actually, is all our Indian SaaS companies, we've got about 15 of these investments. It's a guy from Bangalore. He's selling to Procter & Gamble, and he's selling to an Indian IT guy at Procter & Gamble sitting in Cincinnati, right? So that I think one of the barriers in the past used to be cultural familiarity, and that barrier just disappeared. And there's a lot more mentors and natural helpers for these companies that never existed. So our young founders that come here, for them, it used to be very difficult when we first started investing in U.S. India. Actually, we started investing 20 years ago in U.S. India in the licensed software days. And like most pioneers, we ended up with lots of arrows in our backs. Yeah. But in this cycle, in the last 6-7 years, what we've seen is a young founder comes here, instantly plugged into a network, can hire people, get customers, get advisors, and just the flywheel's going. And that's why, we've invested over $1 billion in the last 24 months in Indian tech. And we're accelerating and increasing it. We're huge believers, particularly SaaS and cross-border SaaS MR.
Fantastic. And that's only continuing to grow. Now, one of the things I wanted to get back to with all of you is let's talk more about the ecosystem here. One of the things Indiaspora has identified is that about 75 to 100 CIOs and CTOs in the Fortune 500 who are of Indian origin, right? Like you said, that's a connect. The CEOs of large companies, not just in tech, but in the Fortune 500, there are 60 CEOs of Indian origin. Forget the tech companies, right? Other companies like consumer goods companies and banks and pharmaceutical companies are Indian, right? So I think that familiarity with Indians is getting bigger and bigger. I think at the same time with China and the issues in China have also helped the Indian ecosystem in a sense because we don't know whether to invest in China and what are the other bets in the marketplace. That's favoring India as well. But let's focus on the ecosystem in the U.S. What if there's an entrepreneur from India who wants to come to the U.S., what happens? Let's talk about that. Sumir, you want to start?
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things that happens is the natural networks really take over, particularly college networks, a lot of IIT founders, BITS Pilani founders, lots of founders. So I think that network automatically kicks in. And then, of course, firms like Nexus and SVB and many other good firms that are focused on cross-border kind of really help because they help with capital, they help with advice, and they help a lot of entrepreneurs that come here quickly figure the market out. And that really just didn't exist before. And I see now with every passing year that muscle is thickening here. And so it's just much easier for entrepreneurs to come in and quickly learn what they need to learn, sort of Silicon Valley style. One of the reasons the Valleys work so well is our highly networked economy, as we all know. And that network is now playing out in the U.S. India corridor and growing really exponentially.
No, that's good because, 5 years ago, an entrepreneur would call me and say, where should I live?
Yeah.
where should I send my kids to school? How do I hire a sales guy? All that has gone away now. They know they got to live in Cupertino. They got to do this. This is a school district, and this is how I hire a sales guy, right? So Priya, any thoughts?
I mean, as Sumir was talking about, I was thinking how I'm now getting intro to founders, right? It's random. It's WhatsApp. They just WhatsApp me and saying and this could be an intro from existing VCs on the ground to say it's a quick intro, and that's how it takes. So they're like, we know we need to talk to you. And that's the pause, right? And they immediately send you a Calendly invite to book it. So efficient. They have this process down to make that, the time lesser to kind of go to market. So that's one. Second, and I think they also are tapped into the right organizations, MR, right? Like, for example, I know we were at SaaS Boomi yesterday. One of the founders were telling me, now I got 10 customers out of this. That's exactly what the process is, right? You know where you need to get. It's not about just the network. Think about go-to-market every single time. You're coming to SVB. It's not just because it's a bank account. What do you get out of it? Is it access to capital, access to customers, or access to investors through the network? So I think you're thinking about, and the founders have the maturity right now. Before it was about, I know, I'm sorry about the fees, but we still charge a little bit, but we're better than others. But so before it was all about, I want zero fees, where can I go? It's not about now that, right? It's about all of it. So I think that maturity has happened. So I think that's one thing to highlight.
Jishnu?
Yeah, nicely articulated. Some of the things, especially since we focus on early stage, I mean, it's and we have seen over the last 14 years that I'm doing this. Progressively, the ecosystem is feeding onto itself. There is a positive virtuous cycle that's happening, and we all are doing our parts there. For example, we have probably at this point 50, 60 companies like that, SaaS companies. There is a separate group for them. First thing they are doing is that even before they made up the mind, or we know that okay, they are ready to move here, they have figured out everything. I mean, it's amazing, right? They're coming in here, and obviously we can do more. There are obviously, I mean, I think the most important question that people come in, I think the basics of life has been figured out. Hiring is the most important question that comes up. That I mean, how would I get somebody from the US ecosystem coming in and being the first hire? And sometimes I mean, we do it across a number of companies that, we sometimes get in the first business hire even before the CEO has moved. So I think, it's a journey. I mean, it has come along a long way, and I'm sure there are rooms to improve.
Let's take a case study of a company, and it can pick one company each from your portfolio. And can you talk through how they got started, maybe a little bit, how you funded them, where they are today? Jishnu? I know you have Dhruva, you have so many companies to talk. Just pick one and talk about the life cycle. That would be interesting, I think, to the audience.
Okay. I will pick a company name of the company is called Postman. Yeah, I'm very fortunate that I'm working with. I will start with that. And but the interesting part. So let me tell you the journey. It's in software, and they're changing the paradigm of software development. How software would be conceived, would be started, would be built, would be thought of is changing dramatically, thanks to their contribution. So it's back in 2014 and it's all in India. 2014, one of our other companies called us up. I mean, we work in and said that, hey, there is this REST client called Postman for testing the APIs that we use. API as in application programming interface, a construct in software to help develop software. So now, they just called us that I have never met the company, but this is something that has come up. I am using it, and it's changing my life. If you guys can figure out, who is doing it, has done it, if you can find them, there might be something interesting. So that was the inspiration that we had 2014. We found, and this gentleman, he was just building it for himself first because they are developers. See, that's another thing. In India, it is today officially the largest hub of developers in the world. Mm-hmm. So when we feel that the best companies are built when the entrepreneurs are first solving for themselves. So he actually solved this for himself, for testing APIs. Then he liked what he has built. He released it. And it turned out that across the world, people are found open source. He released it as open source, and people are finding, and people are using the product. And when we met, they had probably from nowhere, no formal company, a few thousand downloads, and people are just trying it out. We said that, hey, come over. This is some money. this is some space in our Bangalore office, get started. He brought in his 2 other co-founders who were informally collaborating, and that's how the journey began. Now, when the journey started, and in a couple of years when the growth has been phenomenal, growth as in user growth, there was never a focus on revenues. For the right reason, because we felt that if people are using it and getting value, then ultimately you can figure out how to monetize. So in 2 years, like in 2016 or so, it was becoming very clear that the CEO will have to move to US. It's becoming such a company where globally everybody is using. The CEO has to be based out of US. So what we first did is that we helped, we started working with. We first made sure we get in a right independent board member, fantastic person actually. Then we helped him hire the first BP marketing. So this is a company where they have now, okay, let me just tell you fast forward from 2014 to now, it has more than 20 million plus users. Over the lifetime, they have fully grown profitably. I mean, they've raised a bunch of money because there were people who wanted to give them money, but they have never needed to use any of that. And, it's across the world, they have probably employees across 50 countries. All are kind of coming into the product, using the product, and they're contributing into the project. And almost all countries, they have users. And, more than 650,000 organizations are customers. So in this journey, the very first business hire happened even before the CEO moved. And then the CEO came in, and then gradually around him, we helped build out the business team. And now India is a 500 people company. India is a big hub where development, not only just development, actually, by the way, what has happened, India is an English-speaking country, and as companies like Freshworks have shown, you can actually build bunch of your sales operations and support operations out of India, which they have done. And the business leadership has been built out of here. So an example.
Abhinav is a great guy, and the last round valuation was?
About 6 billion.
6 billion. Okay. So Sumir, challenge that one.
Oh my God! Well, we can't.
You 7 billion.
We can't challenge that, but let's talk about. We made our first SaaS investment about 5-6 years ago, and we have many nice SaaS companies in our portfolio that are U.S. India. The first investment we made is a very nice company called Innovacer. It was a U.S. India company started by a couple of founders in Noida. And they were targeting U.S. hospitals, and they had built an electronic health record integration system. And the team did a really good job of that. They had super happy customers, doing a few $1 million in revenue when we invested. And we did the first few rounds entirely ourselves, and then subsequently raised money from outside investors. And the company's done a phenomenal job. Today they are rated really best in class in the U.S. among vendors doing population health management. And they've built a platform across many of the top hospital systems in America, and have crossed $100 million in top line in 4 or 5 years, so doing really well. And have about 300 employees in San Francisco and about 2,000 employees in Noida. And so a nice example of a company that was really nothing 6 years ago that's created a really exciting company that's changing U.S. healthcare and having big impact.
What's it called?
Innovacer. The name of the company is Innovacer. Yeah, so that'll be one exciting one.
Another Abhinav is the CEO of that company.
Yeah, Abhinav is a good name.
and also a big unicorn, several billion in valuation as well. So Priya, match that one too.
So 7 + 7, 14, both are our clients. So 100% of market share right here. While he was asking the question, I was thinking about how do I pick a portfolio company that doesn't show favorites, right? So I want to give 2 examples. One is Freshworks. It just shows the maturity of kind of how SVB has grown with the market. With Freshworks, I wish we could take credit, but we can't because Girish reached out to us through Quora. That's where he found out that SVB is the bank for startups, and he reached out to us. Lo and behold, actually a person that works in our team is the one who helped him, and he is with us till today. I think that's one of an example of how we scale with a company. You could just be starting off a company with a zero balance, zero kind of bootstrapped, and then we kind of help you scale, obviously through financing, core banking, and everything else. More importantly, everything else that comes outside of it, it's the network effect that would help you increase your probability of success. Another one, I would say, fast forwarding it to a proud moment of like several years later, I get a WhatsApp from Shashank. Shashank is the founder of Razorpay, wanting to open an account. So I think that's a really proud moment. I still have that WhatsApp picture saved. I want to show it. So for the folks who don't know what Razorpay, it's one of the biggest fintech kind of innovation in India that's happening. And I would like equivalent to Stripe or more. I think that's again, those are amazing, incredible companies that we get to work with, MR, and it inspires us to do more. I think future is up for India.
So let's turn to challenges, and then we'll get to some questions as well. So what are the challenges? The system is robust. How can we get it to do more? What else is needed on the Indian side, on the U.S. side? Can we get into that?
Maybe while they're thinking, I
sure.
can start off with some basics, right? I think there's a ton of now dollars pouring in. Right? I think the cash is pouring in. With China, kind of the pressure that's happening, a lot of dollars are getting kind of forced in a way into India. It's good and bad, I feel, right? I think there's a lot of dollars, and the founders are still young. Though the maturity has happened, they need the right investor, right folks to kind of guide them to do the right things. So I think that is potentially a risk. May not be for all, but if they don't land into the right investor pool, they may be not being focusing on the right things. That's one. Regulatory changes. I know Tanvi is here. There's a lot of changes that are happening, right? But is it fast enough? I think that is a question. So I think Venk pointed out earlier, I think maybe a startup within the executive committee of the PM's office to make those decisions, to not have those kind of bureaucratic steps to make them. So I think those are the two I would say would help ease a lot of things and move India up on ease of doing business, much higher.
But there have been also some fiduciary issues have come up in companies in India that have made the press, right. Several companies. That could be a potential challenge. Valuations, can they get profitable before they need more money? Any thoughts on those issues?
Yeah, I'll add to what Priya said on those issues, MR. I think one of the things we went through in the last 2 years was a bit of a tech bubble, both here in Silicon Valley as well as in India. And, in a bubble, there's always excesses. So as Priya was saying, I think we saw some super young founders, receiving $500 million, an investor sometimes not even taking board seats, right? So there's sort of this absentee landlord investor mindset. And then on top of that, a lot of pressure on these founders to grow before there's a sort of economic model that makes sense. So we've seen a lot of companies grow with very fast top line, but with business models that don't make sense. And now, like Mr. Buffett says, who's swimming naked when the tide goes out? Well, the tide's gone out a little bit. So now we're going to see you swimming naked. And unfortunately, there's a whole bunch of people that have been swimming naked in the ocean. And they're popping out all over the place, So.
And it is crazy because there was one company recently in India that became a unicorn, did a seed, Series A, B, all within a year and became a unicorn.
Oh my
I don't know how that company was able to define its business model and actually get to that stage, right?
Incredible.
Jishnu?
Yeah, so few things. First of all, I would also say that, probably media does it for a reason, but, Indian press has done a lot. Often, such kind of things, they go through certain fads, and now the fad has somehow happened, it's actually eye-catching to kind of write those kind of stories. It's not, this is just very few samples of what is being talked about. Now, obviously, valuation is valuation. I will actually keep it separate because, at different points of time, markets value in certain ways. At the end of the day, how we look at companies and help them build has nothing to do with valuation. It's about the fundamentals. What they're building, do they have the right foundation? Is there the right business model? Are they looking into right revenues? Not doing certain things to artificially buy revenues so that they can get to the next round. Now, I actually think that whatever all things are happening will be best for the ecosystem because sometimes excesses, as Sumir was saying, leads to a lot of undesirable effect. We have a saying in Nexus, and we are early stage, and we sometimes say that in later rounds when people I mean, for investors come in with big pockets of money, they become the sugar daddy and we are the poor daddy. And sugar daddy has a lot of candies, so they tend to have the influence de facto. So it's a big responsibility for the sugar daddy to do their job, and probably, hopefully, now they will do their job a little better and not being as absentee landlords. I like the not have that absentee landlords mindset. So yeah, I mean, it's a journey, and but I think overall it will be all good.
So we are ready for questions. If not, I could just keep going. Any questions from the audience? Are we ready? No questions? Okay, we'll stop. No, no, just kidding. Who wants to ask the first question? Oh, there. Asha?
Yeah, hi. Asha Jadeja, local VC, and now increasingly running a family foundation. I had a question for all three of you as to, has any of you had direct interaction with the regulatory bodies in India to see what are those obstacles to growth that you are facing, and what is the response been? Have you encountered people in the bureaucracy and maybe even in the PM's office? And if so, what has been the mindset? Because the PM himself seems to be really open to reducing regulatory barriers.
Go, Priya.
I was involved and this is second time in a row it happened. Mr. Piyush Goyal's office reached out to a few of us, and specifically from my end, the ask was for me to put together 10 investors that are looking to invest in India, but they're not, and what could convince them. So I think that was, and it was closed door. No press, nothing, and that was meant to be candid. And this was the first time, Asha, that I saw a government official actually taking notes and repeating it and calling out people for specific asks that they have on wanting to make that change happen. I think these are step forward to make that change happen, right? And there was a follow-up meeting to it, which is, again, I was shocked that there's a follow-up meeting to that meeting. And again, these are conversations that are happening, and a lot was discussed, and a lot of people like Nexus, like WestBridge, they were at the table, large funds wanting to share and wanting to do more, and they were candid in sharing the challenges as well.
Great. Sumir or Jishnu?
Yeah, I would echo what Priya said. I think, Asha, there's been I'd say in the last 7-8 years since Mr. Modi's taken over, definitely a change in attitude among the senior government for sure, where they're very proactive in reaching out to the private sector. They listen a lot. They try to do good things. But to be candid, our sense is when we compare, say, doing a deal in Silicon Valley versus doing a deal in India, it used to be maybe 3 times as hard to do it in India. Now it's maybe twice as hard. So there's improvement, but there's just too much friction in the system. So some of the frictions are complicated tax rules. Some of the frictions are very bizarre rules on options when you grant them to employees, taxes for angels. I mean, just strange bureaucratic rules. Also, for every Indian investment we make, we end up signing like 10 times as many pieces of paper as we would sign for investment we make here. So I say that it's definitely moving in the right direction, and the government, at least at the top, has a right approach, but it's still like it's too much paperwork, it's too slow. It needs to get faster, easier, simpler, like it is here.
Just one point maybe I would add. Among many things, one of the things we have been trying to really bring in that change is that if there is an India domiciled company which has grown and is ready to go public, can we actually take them public in NASDAQ? I mean, that way, it can be much more liquid market and all that. So actually, 4 weeks ago, we had a great IPO in a company called Delivery. You can think of that's like UPS for India. It was, kind of 5 billion kind of listing. I mean, very good offering, 700 million raised. We actually explored to take that company public in US, but we couldn't. So there are those things, and we are explaining, and they, I think, understand that at the end of the day, it's good. If we have access to liquidity, it's actually good for Indian ecosystem. But for example, I mean, till now, it is not yet there. I mean, the intents are there, but it hasn't been actioned yet.
Yes.
My name is Victor Wan. I'm an early stage venture here in Palo Alto. I'm just wondering, besides SaaS seems to be the hottest sector, what other hot sectors that VC investing in terms of a percentage of a $36 billion,
I can start. So across the board, actually, I would say, Victor, maybe SaaS comprises of give or take maybe 20%. So if you look at areas like, a lot of innovation in fintech. We have talked a little bit about what is happening in financial services. Huge, across the board. There is a lot of activities in commerce. E-commerce, initially it started with regular e-commerce model, then it became vertical e-commerce, direct to consumer brands, and many other waves. A lot of very interesting innovation in health tech. Like you heard an example of SaaS innovation, but there are also things which are happening in consumer health. How do you digitize? And because access is a big issue in India, healthcare access is a big issue for 1.3 billion people in India, because the per capita number of doctors are just simply not there, and they are more concentrated in the cities. So this is ways by which you can build profitable business which can create value and plus also have huge amount of impact. Then we are seeing huge sector is education. Education is one area where the propensity for Indians to spend has always been very high. But there also access remained an issue. Now and I think to some extent pandemic has also accelerated it. There has been a lot of innovation and emergence of online education platforms where pedagogy can be delivered irrespective of where the persons are. So yeah, these are some of the examples I would say.
Sumir, anything else?
I would just add. I would echo what Jishnu said, and I would also add, Victor, that the enablers are pretty stunning. So what Reliance did in the Geo network is they built the lowest cost wireless data network in the world. So today, mobile data prices are lower in India than anywhere else, and that's resulted just in an explosion of consumer internet, like Jishnu was saying, across the board. So we're seeing consumer internet companies scale like crazy, edtech, fintech, adtech. We're really surprised the last 3 years, a lot of companies seeing very nice revenue spikes.
And if I can add to that demographic, we have the largest working age population. Add to that one, right? So I think there's a lot of innovation that's going to use through the access that they're going to get.
Yeah, question there. Ranjana?
Hi, I'm Ranjana Clark. So one of the abiding perceptions around India is corruption, and I haven't heard that word at all. And, I know I'm in banking, and anti-bribery and corruption is a real hurdle, but is this sector or is this industry or this corridor immune from it, or why aren't we talking about it?
How do you spell that again? So I think tech in general has been immune to it, right? But
yeah, so, if you look at, of course, there are systemic corruption issues in general. That's probably true everywhere, and definitely there is it in India. I would say the biggest distinction of VC funded companies is that most of these companies are actually starting. We are actually funding at the level they are at the time of their inception. So I think to an extent corruption also happens based on ways of doing things over the years. So if there are companies who have been in business for, let's say, 20 years, 25 years, they might have certain ways of doing business. They may not have adapted to how things would happen. The laws might have changed. It sometimes may not be intent. It might be how things are done. And of course, it may not be what is supported by the law. So it is seen as corruption. Those are not the companies that VCs are funding. So most of the, all our companies, if I look at the cross-section, would be out of college, few years, as bright, as idealistic, as kind of motivated, ambitious, wants to do good, those kind of people. And it's a lot of responsibility we bear to kind of set up the right infrastructure of governance, the intents, the path in which companies should be built. So as you would expect a Silicon Valley company, by and large, this is the culture you see in India. Obviously, like anywhere else, there will be examples, and maybe if there is one example, maybe the entire media just wants to write about it. So that's is there. But as a whole, I think it lot like VCs and board members have a lot of responsibility, and by and large, I think this hasn't been that much of an issue.
So Sumir, when you make big investments, you take a board seat?
Yes,
much?
we take a board seat pretty much always, Amar. Absolutely. Yes.
So you're not an absentee landlord. That's good.
We hope not. Unless Jishnu's involved, then we can pull back.
Yeah. But talk about governance a bit.
No, but I think this point is excellent. This question you raised on corruption and governance, I think it's very linked to governance. So one of the issues in the corridor has been, or in India, I should say, less a corridor, has been that traditionally in India, if you're an entrepreneur and you stole money from the company, there was no consequence. Because our criminal justice system was so slow, you'll be in court for 20 years and you'll never go to jail. So there was sort of, unlike in America, you steal money from a company, you go to jail, right? It's a clear consequence here. That's changed. So now we've had a bunch of CEOs in India jailed. I mean, it's a terrible thing to say, but it does change the environment where people know, like, oh my God, if I do something wrong, there's a consequence. And so I think that the government's done a good job, because where there have been situations where there's been, corruption that's discovered, they've really cracked down and there've been real consequences. And that's a good thing, because that results in some pain, but a lot of clean out of some of that old stuff that's happening. And to Jishnu's point, and to answer your question, Amar, I think there are companies that are, in the corridor, what happens mostly is companies are very well governed, meaning that there are 2 or 3 investors that put money in, and then they really care, and they show up on the board and they're active. I think the risk is when you have sort of the absentee landlord model, but generally, by and large, most investment firms do spend a lot of time with the companies, and that's the key, because you have sort of very young entrepreneurs, they've raised a lot of capital, and they need guidance and mentorship so they don't go off the rails and do something that they shouldn't do,
Yes.
In the case of companies where they need short-term financing for 1 or 2 years, large amount, they have an option between the banks and the investors for a SBLC vehicle, if you will. What are the trade-offs on that? Because with the SBLC, you can get enough finance to finish your project, but you don't give away the equity. But then that will lead up to a much bigger valuation. Any comments on the trade-offs, or how do you evaluate that?
Have your companies taken debt versus equity? And
So, debt financing is definitely a viable option. So a couple of things that happens, and some of these will be specific for India. So in general, between equity and debt usually comes later in the life cycle when company has a business model, has revenues and all. That will be the right time to take debt. Otherwise, the exposure is enormous. In India, in general, the rates haven't been as favorable. Even when, for evolved companies, when they evaluate debt options, sometimes, at least in the last few years, it has been no-brainer in US. It is not to that extent in India. So that's one consideration. The second consideration that comes in is that, sometimes actually we have encouraged taking, and that of course dilutes us also. We have encouraged taking equity capital from the right partners and not going for debt capital, because we felt that the value add that will happen with the equity capital might more than make up for the kind of dilution that will be there. So.
If I can add on, I was waiting for Jishnu to say I sent all the companies to Priya for debt. But, I think that's a question that comes with all the time, right? And Jishnu rightly said, it's the time has to be right for debt. The timing, is it the right time for debt or equity, right? I think early on, until you're ready, the debt may not be available, whether be it from SVB or outside, and the cost of capital might be too high for you to take that debt. And it may not be able to help you scale to where you want. So I think typically where debt comes in is you've raised a round from the right investors, because as a lender, as I'm giving the debt, I'm looking for them to kind of help me guide if I should give them the loan or not. So investor syndicate plays a huge part in when we lean in to give debt. And as Jishnu said, the rates in India has not been as favorable to the founders. So a lot of my activities have been more focused on cross-border enterprise tech. So if a company from India coming in US, they look, feel, smell just like a US company. So whether be it's MRR, ARR, whether be one or more founders are based out of here. So for that, then it's apples to apples comparison to a US company. And then you're talking about US interest rates, which is, it's going slowly up, but it's pretty low compared to India. So I think a lot of criteria is going to play.
question there.
So I wanted to follow up on question from Victor and then another question. One is, yes, you spoke about SaaS and fintech and edutech and other service, startup companies. Most of them depend on some kind of cloud-based technology to develop and then service mostly B2C or B2B2C. But what about deep tech? Because when you talk about Israel and China, the first phase in China was all deep tech companies. Israel is still deep tech, a lot of core technologies, a lot of IP getting formed, which I don't see in India. A lot of my peers moved to India in 2008, 2009 timeframe, and after 4 years, they all came back because they could not do a deep tech company in India. That's number one question. Number two is, what percentage of these Indian companies are getting revenues from Indian businesses in B2B sense? Because even a Reliance can delay your payment for 3 months or 6 months. I keep on hearing it's very hard to get payment from the Indian companies in India, unlike Net 15, Net 30, Net 45, which is a very well established over here.
Deep tech?
Yeah. So, deep tech, there is a range of deep tech. I mean, deep tech can be quantum computing. Deep tech can also be great IPs being built in software. If it is about the first, India has ways to catch up. There is, I think, in one of the things India definitely needs to invest more on, and actually Prime Minister Modi knows that, and he wants to do it, is higher education and research, investment in higher education and research. So that, like Indians are doing wonders, but they are doing those wonders not in India, but outside. So I think that part is still, we have ways to go. On the deep tech part, when it comes to software innovation, ranging from infrastructure all the way up to platform, amazing work is happening. You are right. 2008 versus, there was not things that much that was happening in 2008, but the curve has been, like the speed has been as much as light speed, I would say, where nothing was there versus you are seeing global leaders coming out of India. They are the globally leading product. They are not being bought because it is cheaper. They are being bought because they are the best in class, whether it is Postman, Hasura, Dhruva. I know I'm rattling out my companies, but there are a lot of other examples. So it's really like it's very heartening to see. And see, the other thing that has happened, I think fundamentally Indian education system in a way is very competitive. So whenever they get access, they get to see certain things, they adapt and they build very fast. So that's what you are seeing by the youngsters who are coming out of great engineering colleges, and they are like the progressive ones. They are thinking that, okay, what can I do to put together, which is not yet there. Because see, in today's world, and India doesn't need, to some extent there is some localization need, but by and large there is no localization need. So if you can't just say that, hey, I am doing a product which is best in India for India, because a better product out from Israel or US will eat your lunch. So you have to have that global mindset from the beginning. And to your question on banks and the challenges for collecting revenues from Indian houses, that's true. And in fact, if you look at even today, the IT spend, percentage of IT spend that happens in Indian companies isn't that much actually. So that's why it is also even more paramount that if companies are coming out of India, they should, like especially for the SaaS, B2B SaaS, they should think global from day one. Not go global right away, but think global from day one. And actually, on the flip side, I will also say that things are changing. There was at a time a lot of DIY mindset in all the banks, and they thought that I can get everything done if I hire Infosys or Wipro and tell them what to do, and they will build it. That is actually changing because they are seeing how fast their competitive banks or others are changing. And they are actually writing. We are seeing our companies getting seven-figure accounts. So yeah. Lot of things happening.
Sumir, any comments on that? Local market, Indian market?
Yeah. I would say about 5 years ago, we had felt very negative on any Indian SaaS company focused on the domestic market. We've changed our view completely. 3 of our investments today have the majority of their revenues coming from India, and I would say regional countries around India. And that market surprised us. We know one customer for one of our companies that's paying $7 million a year ARR for software, a single contract. And we know lots of other $1 million plus contracts, and they pay on time. Now, they are 20-30% of the old economy customers that you don't want to touch. But in India, everybody knows that list. And I won't mention names. They're a well-known list. And then there's a lot of very good companies that actually pay US style. Yes, they will be tougher on the front end to get them as a customer. They'll ask tougher questions. US customer, they watch the money much more closely. But there are big businesses being built in India and Southeast Asia, and those are markets U.S. software companies don't really understand. So there's a big opportunity there, not as big as the U.S. market, but we think quite an interesting emerging category.
Fantastic. Priya, any?
No, I was just thinking about the earlier question too, just the innovation that's happening, R&D, when Jishnu was mentioning, it's happening at the university level now. I mean, obviously IITs are well known. BITS calling you out, Raju. He gave me a hard time last time.
BITS Pilani.
BITS Pilani. And Indian Institute of Science, right? I think we're actually, in our report that I mentioned earlier, we're doing a page just on innovation that's coming out of these universities. So I think starting from that early on, I think hopefully that'll help with the deep tech innovation. We're not there yet, right, at the quantum computing level, but hopefully we want to get there. And as Deep mentioned,
that's true. We have started seeing some signs of that.
That's exactly it. Yeah. Baby steps, but we'll get there. So.
Do you guys have any college dropouts who are running some of your companies in India, or do they all finish?
Do parents allow that? I'm like...
Answer is yes, and resounding yes. Like, we recently funded a company 1 year back, and two gentlemen, 18-year-old, got into freshman computer science in Stanford, decided not to take it, said no to Stanford, and started a company in Mumbai. So,
How much did you give them?
So far they have raised $300 million, but we started with small amount.
Okay.
So the company's name is Zepto, by the way. Love Adit.
Great. Well, that brings our session to a close. Just 10 seconds, final thoughts on the U.S. India Corridor 2030.
No, the time is now. I think let's go.
Great.
Yeah, really, I agree. Really exciting times, and I think wonderful 10-year trajectory.
Yeah, the inflection point is here, and we are all super excited.
My prediction is there are direct flights from here to Delhi and Bangalore. I think we'll get flights to Mumbai, Chennai, Hyderabad. I think that'll kind of show us where the path is going. So on that note, I want to thank the three panelists for a fantastic job, and thank you to Asia Society. Thank you.
Thank you, Amar.
Thank you.